Another weekend, another apparent assassination attempt on somebody running for president. I mean, it's really quite wild. Give me your thoughts.
Well, I think, for one thing, let's just start with the most important thing. This is exceptionally disturbing, okay? I don't care who the candidates are. I don't care what their political affiliation is. I don't care what their ideology is. The notion that we're going to have our presidential candidates targeted for assassination ought to really shock people. I mean, truly. And I don't care who you are, how you plan to vote, whether you plan to vote, what party you are in Congress. But, I guess one has to say enough is enough. Now, what do I mean by that? I think one of the key things out of this, Mark, is certainly and must be a recalibration of protection for candidates. This has gone on over the last year, most notably for RFK, who requested on multiple occasions over the last year. Look, we're receiving threats. We had one individual show up at an event. They didn't give him any. He was having to pay for his own private security detail, and they were going back. What they were hearkening back to, Mark, was, well, this is the way we've always done it. Well, you know what? As the guys in law enforcement say, we are in a new threat environment, Mark, and the old rules are simply not adequate. So what do I mean by that in the current circumstance? The Secret Service has now come out and said, were this to be President Biden, we would have literally encircled the entire golf course with security. But we didn't do that in this case. We used the resources that we traditionally have, which is a hole or two in front of Trump on the golf course, and a hole or two behind him is what we are able and traditionally have provided, and that's what we did. So this wasn't a failure. I think this is important to note. I'll end with this. This was not a failure on the part of traditional Secret Service methods, but what it was the lack of a recalibration of where we currently are in the political environment, in the threat environment. And it's now clear that, and there's been calls for this from both sides of the aisle already this morning, we have to provide everybody, including Trump, with enhanced security in the current threat environment. That's it.
And it's not just Trump, and it's not just these high-profile candidates for president, Gary. I was mentioning before, U.S. Marshals reporting threats to federal judges are up. They're twice, in some cases even a multiple. I was reading, 3 times what they were year to year, and members of Congress as well. We saw what happened to Nancy Pelosi's husband. I mean, so it does feel as though it's a violence-charged kind of rhetoric and political environment these days. As you say, it's different than it used to be.
Yeah, well, exactly, Mark. And so you even had Biden today and yesterday saying, look, we need to provide even more resources to the Secret Service. Again, I want to be really clear. There's no ding on the Secret Service procedures today, unlike the evaluation of what happened in Pennsylvania. That report is to come out, and you may have heard last week that the ranking Democratic member on that report committee said it's going to be shocking to the public when they hear some of the breakdowns, some of the failures. Okay, that's not the case this time. This is about resources devoted to security. And to your point, Mark, we've had Supreme Court justices who felt threatened and actually had people at their residences. Now we're at federal judiciary, members of Congress. I mean, I just think we are in a new world, and there's going to have to be enhanced security presence across the board, across the political spectrum, unlike we've had in the past.
Now let me ask you a cynical political question. It seems as though from the last attempt, the actual shots fired to this attempt, that the degree of sympathy or the whatever political gain again that Trump might have gotten from this didn't seem to show up in any kind of measurable way. I mean, first of all, I would ask you whether that's indeed the case. But secondly, if that's true, this is a weird way to put it, but kind of a political sideshow. It doesn't really affect the main event.
Well,
I mean, I'm sorry to term it that way, but yeah.
Yeah, yet to be determined, Mark. I mean, I think, for one thing, because these events have been happening on the weekends, and this one was just yesterday, I really think some people are literally just finding out about it. Some won't even find out about it till tonight or the next couple of days. That's part of it. The other part of it is that the shooter apparently did not fire any shots. What happened was, according to early reports, that a Secret Service detail saw the muzzle coming through the fence of this AR-15 weapon that this guy was brandishing, who, by the way, if people haven't heard yet, left it at the scene with a GoPro camera that apparently he was going to record his efforts, and two backpacks. That was all dumped when Secret Service actually took shots at this guy. I mean, started firing off rounds. So apparently he did not get off a round, and maybe that has something to do with it, Mark. But I'll tell you, I even hate to sort of frame this in political terms because it's so egregious, to even attempt to do it. But I guess your basic bottom line question is, will Trump benefit from this politically? I don't know. And frankly, to be blunt about it, I don't care. Right now, what we have to do is say, Trump, Harris, RFK, judges, members of Congress, whoever they are that needs security, needs to get it, period, end of story.
Sure. What I'm seeing, and that's a fair response. I mean, it's interesting because everything that, I think that's a fair response, full stop. But I will say that former President Donald Trump has played the assassination. The last one, was it 5 weeks ago, whatever it was. He's played it for a lot of different things. Political benefit, I would also suggest for commercial benefit. He sold, as you'll remember, sneakers that were the special assassination sneakers. And he put together a merch collection almost overnight based on it. So I'm going to say what used to be some kind of off limits sort of question related to politics and how one might exploit something like this, an incident like this. All of a sudden, I feel a little bit better about asking a question like that in the new environment. Now, here's what I wanted to tell you. Somebody says, I disagree, Gary. He has plenty of protection. His team is just getting complacent. There are not enough agents to deal with other folks. It is true the agency is stretched, but do you feel essentially, hey, man, I don't care how stretched you are, you need to step it up and essentially break more dollars loose to protect the president, even the former president, even more than he is?
Yeah, and look, this isn't just me speaking. There's no indication of complacency on the part of the Secret Service detail for President Trump. There really isn't. Now, we're going to get a detailed report of the Pennsylvania incident, and I have absolutely no doubt, and we're already hearing it today, that committee is now going to take this incident and put it under the microscope, as they should in Congress, as they should. And what will come out of that, my strong indication is already preliminary indications. There are going to be changes in protocols out of the Pennsylvania incident. I mean, so, you had, we talked about this before, you had multiple agencies. It's not just Secret Service. People don't understand this. There's other federal agencies, ATF and others involved. There are state agencies, i.e. Highway Patrol involved. There are local law enforcement agencies. All those are being scrutinized out of Pennsylvania, that incident, and they will be here. But all indications are that there simply was not enough security at the Florida golf course to be able to spy this guy out early. And they've already talked about where the whole location was, that there's a major thoroughfare running beside that there's bushes and simply a chain link fence, and that there just weren't enough resources to find this guy. I mean, you would think if he's got a muzzle pointed through the chain link fence in the bushes, you could spy this guy out if you had security walking down that fence line, right? They said they weren't able to have those kind of resources. I'm not going to be the final arbiter of this. Congress and the internal investigation is going to be, but early indications are that was the case.
I like that you mention more than just the Secret Service, because people who are regulars on this show and who listen to this show or watch this show regularly know that I haven't been kind to the Secret Service. I think they have a troubled history. I think they've been dining out on protecting presidents, which is kind of the way we see them, the heroic work they do, protecting public officials, and that is heroic work. But the agency is troubled, and if you Google Secret Service scandal, you can read all about everything from hookers to drug deals to, I mean, they ran a brothel brothel out of Latin America. Okay, I mean, this is an organization that has great people associated with it, and people are doing heroic work, and then people who are toxic and are corrupt. And so I don't know where we end up in terms of the actual work that's being done day to day, but it's more than just the Secret Service. That's what I was getting to. You so beautifully point out that it's all of these other agencies that work with the Secret Service to try to protect these public officials, and they have to be involved in whatever conversations moving forward are developed to protect and improve the protection around public officials.
Yeah, and I think that house cleaning that you mentioned as needed, Mark, in the Secret Service is going to happen. I have absolutely no doubt. I mean, we already saw the director at the time after Pennsylvania resign under that heat, under that pressure, right? And I think there's going to be, I have no doubt that members of Congress are going to be on this thing over the next 6 to 12 months. There is going to be a house cleaning. I have no doubt about that. I don't care who wins in November. I think the Secret Service is, as they say, the gig is up. And I think that it's going to be a thorough evaluation of resources, of person power, of protocols, and even of personalities and individual persons. And if people have a troubled history and they got to go, I think they're going to go, because here's the bottom line for me, Mark. Can you imagine either Kamala Harris or Donald Trump or current sitting President Biden or anybody else being actually assassinated during our election cycle? What that would do? I mean, I think that would be horrific on a scale that we can't even imagine for our own politics, for our international perspective and perception. And they can't even protect their own candidates. I mean, our allies and our adversaries. I think this has to be shored up, and it has to happen quickly and thoroughly.
It is interesting, Eric points out. Wonder how the would-be shooter obtained his weapon. If only there was some kind of federal background check that might have flagged his status as a known felon. It is true that, as a felon, he's not supposed to be able to acquire this weapon, Gary, but that's not getting a lot of oxygen right now.
Well, he's got when all the details of this come out, Mark, this guy has a lengthy rap sheet. That stretches back a long ways. Ironically, he was interviewed by the New York Times, I guess, or the Washington Post last year. He's been involved politically. He's been anti-Trump. When this all comes out, there's going to be a lot of question marks again about how does a guy like this, A, get the weapon, and then B, point it through a chain link fence at one of our two presidential candidates. It boggles the mind in some ways that this is actually was possible over the weekend.
I'm reminded in the chat of something that is true, which is that when president, and by the way, it continues now that he's no longer president, Donald Trump charges the Secret Service the full retail rate for staying at his clubs. And oftentimes, and by the way, that's just the price of doing business. But he was, when he was president, bankrupting essentially the Secret Service, as you know, because he was not sure it was the way it was going down, whether or not he was going to be staying in Mar-a-Lago, whether he was going to go to Bedminster, whether he was going to go even over to Scotland. And the Secret Service had to reserve and pay for rooms in all those places just in case. So Donald Trump has played fast and loose with the way he's allowed the Secret Service to essentially feather his bed. That's just Trumpian. I guess we kind of just accept it now. But it's an interesting relationship, might be a way to put it, that Trump has had with the Secret Service.
Well, I think that relationship has evolved very rapidly over the last 6 weeks, Mark. And, he's speaking very, very highly of the Secret Service, but everything. The expense accounts, everything. You pointed out, your suspect charges that some Secret Service agents were making for, you mentioned the activities. I think top to bottom, man, there's going to be no escaping an amazingly thorough vetting of the Secret Service. And I think importantly, those affiliated relationships that you and I have both referenced going forward.
All right. So now let me take you to a poll. I know this is not necessarily anything that we can put great faith in, but that's why I ask you. The Des Moines Register's latest presidential state poll in Iowa might be something to look at. I was mentioning to people in June, Trump was ahead of Joe Biden by 18 points, Gary. But Harris has narrowed that margin to 4 points. This is in a deep red state. Trump won Iowa by 8 points in the election against Biden in 2020, and I'm wondering whether or not, I mean, I don't know. So it's 47 to 43% among likely voters in the state of Iowa. Again, this is from the new Des Moines Register poll. As we try to read these tea leaves that feel as though they have to in some way point to what's happening around the edges, because I feel like that's where this election is going to go down. Is there anything to draw from this deeply red state and these new poll results?
Well, that's difficult to say in a broad sense. I will say this: Iowa is not in play. I don't hear any noises at all that the Harris people are going to drop a single dime extra into Iowa. They don't believe that that's a place they're going to be able to play. I mean, these numbers go back and forth. I mean, I think you can certainly say, we know this for a fact across the board. Every state, Harris is polling better than Biden did. I mean, that was just, that was cataclysmic, as you know, back there in June before the debate for the Democrats and for Biden. Now, going forward, I think we have to go back to ground zero, which is those 7 battleground states. And this is a remarkable statement. There are right now, it is so close in those states that you cannot, most of them are being won or led, that's air quotes here, they're yes people, by less than 1 percentage point, Mark. Now you got Georgia leaning more Trump. He's at 3 or 4 points there. You got Wisconsin, the same for Harris. But if you look across the board, there was an interesting statement, I think it was made by Nate Cohen in the New York Times today, who said, hey, listen, if you take the battleground states, you cannot, if you just take the states and you take out the states that are less than 1 percentage point, in other words, you can't attribute them to either candidate because they're a point something. He said, nobody gets to 270. Nobody. All right. Take out those less than one. And he said, and that has never happened in modern polling. So that's how close it is, Mark. And I think the next week we'll get some more polling done in those individual battleground states after the debate last week. Those will be very important. And we'll get some more. And those are the most important, of course, because the national polls will have no impact per se on the Electoral College. So
sure.
in another week's time, Mark, we should have a lot more data points on those battleground state polls, and we'll see if those have moved, both after the debate and potentially we'll see if this weekend's assassination attempt moved them in favor of Trump in any way, shape, or form.
I'll let you go here in a minute, but I'm just curious also about down ballot races and other races that aren't top of ticket. This presidential stuff can distract us to the point that we ignore Congress and the Senate. Can you speak to that? Because I'm seeing that some down ballot races, even among the GOP, they are lagging. Trump has a 9 percentage point lead in Ohio, for example, and Sherrod Brown is leading by 3.5 percentage points.
Right.
So speak to the general state of the races that have to do with Congress.
Yeah, that's a great question, Mark. And I think let me just zero in real quick in the limited time we have on a couple of them. Okay. So the most significant one right now is the Montana Senate race, okay? Sitting incumbent Tester against his Republican challenger. Right now, the incumbent, the Democrat, Tester, is behind by about 7 or 8 points. That is significantly concerning for the Democrats because it's assumed by both parties that West Virginia is going to flip with Manchin dropping out, the incumbent Democrat, then independent, dropping out. That's going to go Republican, all right? That gets them to 50-50. All right. And if Republicans pick up Montana, it's 51-49. And everything after that is gravy. Right. But that race right there is the pivot point for control of the Senate, which, of course, is absolutely vital because that's the confirmation house for SCOTUSes, right? For federal judges, they are the brakes. Whatever the House does, the Senate, with its current ability to still filibuster and et cetera, and have one member hold up a vote. That race in Montana right now may be the single most important down ticket race there is. And that's the one everybody's watching very carefully.
And as you say, the Democrat is behind. The incumbent is behind. Yeah.
Right. And that is also a state that, of course, Trump won by double digits, and everybody expects him to do the same again. Tester has survived a couple of previous races, but that was always something of a long shot. You can look at the Ohio race for Senate, the Pennsylvania race for Senate. All those are in play. Surprisingly, the Maryland Senate race is now more in play than people thought it was going to be. Deep blue, that's more in play. But that Montana race is the pivot point right now, Mark.
Do we have a piece of video we want Gary to look at, Tony, or not? No? No. Okay, good. I just want to make sure I didn't leave anything on the table. Gary, love your takes. What a bizarre, I feel like every weekend, we talk to you on Mondays, and I feel like every weekend has gotten more bizarre. You throw in an assassination attempt and this ridiculousness with the dogs and cats. I mean, do you think this dogs and cats thing, has become a fact, regardless of how it was birthed, because I think it was birthed as a falsehood, okay? I mean, based on everything I'm seeing, there were no 911 calls complaining about this. There were no pets stolen. There aren't dogs and cats it's just not true, okay? But it's become this thing, talking point. Again, it seemed like a joke, but now it's become, there are real life consequences, right, that are happening in Springfield. My question to you is political, which is it a distraction? Is it to refocus on immigration, even though it's a perverse way to do it? How do you see it?
I think, honestly, Mark, it becomes more of a comical meme. There goes Donald again. I will tell you this, a lot of political observers are already saying today, those things pop out when we don't have big things to focus on, like another assassination attempt. I think this, what happened yesterday on that golf course in Florida, take out the old eraser your teacher used to use on the chalkboard and start erasing, right? Because that's going to take a lot off the table. And then later this week, when we get more of these larger polls and these battleground state polls, I think the dog cat thing is going to become a distant memory, honestly, Mark. I mean, we have 50 days until the election. I guarantee you there are other big shoes that are going to drop. Who knows what they are. And they're going to make some of these smaller things look minuscule by comparison. Evidence of what I'm talking about, what happened on that golf course yesterday in Florida.
Right on. Gary Dietrich, you can see him across the CBS television stations and across iHeartMedia and iHeartRadio. Love our Mondays with you, pal. Thank you so much. Gary Dietrich.
Thanks a lot, Mark.
Yeah. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.